But the latest, and perhaps really, next to Mexico and the Jazz High, I'll tell in a minute, best vision, also on High, but under entirely different circumstances, was the vision I had of Neil as he showed me one afternoon in January on the sidewalks of Workaday San Francisco, just like Workaday afternoon on Moody Street in Lowell, when boyhood buddy funny guy GJ and I played zombie piggybacks in mill employment offices and workmen's saloons. The Silver Star it was. And what and how the Three Stooges are like when they go staggering and knocking one another down the street. Moe, Curly, who's actually the ball-domed one, Big Husky, and meaningless Goof, though somewhat mysterious as though he was a saint in disguise, can't remember his name, a masquerading super-duper witch doctor with good intentions, actually. Can't think of his name. Neil knows his name, the bushy, feathery-haired one. And Neil was supposed to be looking after his work. We just blasted a pint in the car as we drove down the hill into wild mid-market traffic and out third past the Little Harlem, where 2.5 years ago we jumped with the wild Tendercats and Freddie and the rest. I dig the Little Harlem and rainy midnights coming home from work in the black slouch hat from the corner, the pale, pretty pink neons, the modernistic front, the puddles so rosy glowing at the foot of the entrance, the long arrowing, deserted Folsom Street which, as I hadn't remembered in my back east reveries, runs straight into the far lights of the Mission or Richmond or whatever district, all glitters in the indigo distance of the night, to make you think of trucks and long hauls to Paso Robles, Leak Obispo or Monterey, or Fresno in the mist of highways. The ones with an end which is water orients and the empurpled Golgothian panoplies of Pacific Bowl and Abyss. Past the dingy bars with their incredible names, colored bars like Moonlight in Colorado. That's one actually in Fillmore, or Blue Midnight or Pink Glass, and inside it's all wretched raw brown whiskey and mauve Boilermakers. Past Mission Street earlier too, before Folsom, with its corner conglomerate of bums, or sometimes lines of dragged winos so torpid that when pretty women pass they don't even look, even though they're waiting in line to give blood for $4 at Cutter's, so they can cut off and buy wine and brandy for the Embarcadero night. And if they do look, it's accidental. And they seem to be too guilty to look at ordinary women, only Steamboat Annies of pier front bouges with knots in their sticks for calf muscles and hagless tooth marks in their purply gums. Yes, right. Bums of Mission and Howard that live in miserable flop hotels like the Skylark in Denver. That Neil and his father, old Neil Pomeroy the tinsmith, lived in, and from which they took their Sunday afternoon walks together hand in hand and amiable after the previous Saturday night's hassles over his over-drinking wine and a ceremonial saved-up evening movie. So he'd snore at usher close-up time, and lights on in the show house would reveal to shuffling audiences of old Mexican and Archie families the sight of one of their fellow Americans a bit under the weather in a seat. This being the capper to a whole day of Saturday joys for little Neil, such as reading the Count of Monte Cristo while his father worked in the busy weekend morning, clean up at the Skylark, and a regular good meal in a fairly good restaurant in late afternoon. Then maybe a moment's lingering with the majority of non-celebrating Saturday night bums wrangled around in seated positions in the sitting room, the longer winter nights of which Neil endured, aiming spitballs at plaster targets and at celestial ceiling cracks as a big old clock talkety-talked the Januaries away, and like in a movie, the calendars flapped, and still the land and the man survived, stood fixed and immovable in the blur flap of white pages representing time. Usually the man was Neil's dad, the land, Colorado, the occasion and occupation, hope, good boy hope for a change. But now it's May, and they're going to a show and saying good evening to the bums who sit in state over this old thing, just like French sewing sisters in a provincial town. May, and Larimer Street is hum-buzzing with that same excitement, that same countrified, wrangly, sad toot and tinkle of old mainline shopping streets in Charleston, West Virginia, with all its spotted farmer cars ranged, and the canoa flowing, in the southern railroad town with moils of activity as sun-tortured 5 and 10s, across from the tracks, awnings, nations of Negroes lounging by beater stores in near the tobacco warehouses, flashing aluminum lights in the southern day fire. And Los Angeles, when the parade goes up and down both sides in a cracked old Crazy John Gaunt from a rackety house in the Telegraph Grove outside the Bakersfield Flats, with his entire brood of 9 packed and pushed up to the torn, flat-assed black tarpaulin roof of his fantastic, ancient 1929 touring Imperial Buick with the wooden spokes, 2 of them cracked, in a side rack for spares like a snail's shell goof on the running board. Old John Gaunt and Ma Gaunt with her overalls in sorrow. Has to wait while Paul gets his fill at the shooting gallery at South Main, 2 blocks from System Auto Parks. It's May, and little Neil and old man go cutting together into the adventures of a hard-won evening, and one which, of course, like all life, is doomed to tragic, unnameable, to make you speechless and sad-faced forever death. Just as I used to hurry with my father in May dusks of Saturday, towards unspeakable seashores with lights before them, and swooping spaces fit for gulls and cloud scuds, towards ramps of yellow sulfur lamplight, overdrives, sudden dank side alleys, when there came among the greases and irons and black dust of ramps and cobbled avenues like the avenues of factories in Germany, those secret chop sueys from Boston Chinatown to make my mouth water and my thoughts hasten to the wink of Chinese lanterns, hung in red doorways, at the base of golden tinsel port steps, leading up to the Mandarin secrets of within. So when Neil dreamed of being Christo thrown in the sea in a bag, I was kidnapped and shanghaied and orphaned to strange but friendly old Chinaman, who was my only contact with hopes of returning to my former life. Orphaned in the interesting old void, eh? May night on Larimer, when the sun is red on green storefronts and Army-Navy suits by the door, and makes a ray and a frazzle by an empty bottle, foot of a hydrant, illuminates the reveries of an aged lady in a window above the windows of empty storerooms. She looks on Wine Coop, Wazee, and the rail. We passed 3rd Street and all that. We came driving slowly, noticing everything, talking everything, to the rail yards where we worked, and got out of the car to cross the warm, airy plazas of the day, and there particularly with a fine soot scent of coal and tide and oil and big works, a fly across haze oil shimmers, the tar soft under shoe, noticing how great the day and how in the experience of our lives together we were always finding ourselves in a golden, sleepy good afternoon just like fishing. Well, really like the afternoons that must have been experienced by the noble son of his host, Nestor's friend. Wild night charioteerings across the ghosts and white horses of phallic classical fate in the gray plain to the sea. Rewardful afternoons for tired winners. Caresses of cups and figs in the lull of heroes. Just like that. Neil and me. Only American. Neil saying, "Now, damn it, boy, you gotta admit that we're high and that was real good wine and more instant and interesting. And always happening and everything always all right." We sauntered thus. Come in the green clunker for some reason. Wore our usual greasy bum clothes. Put real bums to shame. But nobody with the power to reprimand and arrest us in his house. Began somehow talking about the Three Stooges. We're headed to see Mr. So-and-so in the office and on business, and around us conductors, executives, commuters, consumers rushed, or sometimes just maybe ambling Russian spies carrying bombs in briefcases. And sometimes rag bags, I bet. Just foolishness. And the station there, the creamy stucco suggestive of palms like the Union Station in L.A., with its palms and mission arches and marbles, is so unlike a railroad station to an Easterner like myself, used to old red brick and soot irons, exciting gloom fit for snows, and voyages across pine forests to the sea. Well, at that great station out there, I ran over to that ice that morning en route to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh, so unlike a railroad station that I couldn't imagine anything good and adventurous coming from it. We, in our youth, had spent goof hours around railroad stations. In fact, the last time I was in Lowell, we staggered and laughed past the depot to the nearest bar and jumped and whooped over 4-foot snowbanks to boot, bareheaded and coatless. But here, nothing. Only bright California gloom and propriety. I suppose because Neil works for them there. Nothing but whiteness and everything busy, official, let's say Californian, no spitting. You're at the carven arches of a great white temple of commercial travel in America. If you're going to blank a cigar, do it on the sly. And so on. But really, when it came into Neil's head to imitate the stagger of the Stooges, and he did it wild, crazy, yelling in the sidewalk right there by the arches and by hurrying executives, I had a vision of him which at first, manifold it is, was swamped by the idea that this was one hell of a wild, unexpected twist in my suppositions about how he might now in his later years feel, 25, about his employers and their temple conventions. I saw his, again, rosy, flushing face exuding heat and joy, his eyes popping in the hard exercise of staggering, his whole frame of clothes capped by those terrible pants with 6-7 holes in them, and streaked with baby food, ice cream, gasoline, ashes. I saw his whole life. I saw all the movies we'd ever been in. I saw for some reason he and his father on Larimer Street not carrying in May. Their Sunday afternoon walks, hand in hand in back of great baking soda factories, and along deadhead tracks and ramps, at the foot of that mighty red brick chimney a la Chirico or Chico Velasquez, throwing a huge long shadow across their path in the gravel and the flat. Supposing the Three Stooges were real. So I saw them spring into being at the side of Neil in the street right there in front of the station. Curly, Moe, and Larry! That's his name, Larry. Moe, the leader. Mopish, Mowbray, mope-mouthed, mealy, mad, hanking, making the others quake, whacking Curly on the iron pate, backhanding Larry, who wonders, picking up the sledgehammer, honk, and ramming it down nozzle first on the flat pan of Curly's skull, boing. And all big dumb convict Curly does is muckle and yuckle and squeal, pressing his lips, shaking his old butt like jelly, nodding his jello fists, eyeing Moe, who looks back at him, and with that lord and surly, what are you gonna do about it? On the thunderstorm eyebrows like the eyebrows of Beethoven, completely iron-bound in surls. Larry, in his angelic, or rather, he really looks like he conned the other two who let him join the group. So they had to pay him all these years a regular share of the salary to them who worked so hard with the props. Larry, goof-haired, mopple-lipped, lisped, muxed, and completely flunk, trips over a pail of whitewash, falls face first in the 7-inch nail that remains embedded in his eye bone. The eye bones connect to the shadow bone. Shadow bones connect to the luck bone. Luck bones connect to the foul bone. Foul bones connect to the high bone. High bones connect to the air bone. Air bones connect to the sky bone. Sky bones connect to the angel bone. Angel bones connect to the God bone. God bones connect to the bone bone. Moe yanks it out of his eye and impales him with an 8-foot steel rod. It gets worse and worse. It started on an innocent thumbing, which led to backhand, then the pastries, then the nose yanks. Blap bloop. Going, gong. Now as in a sticky dream set in syrup universe, they do muckle and moan and pull and mop about like I told you in an underground hell of their own invention. They are involved and alive. They go haggling down the street at each other's hair, socking, remonstrating, falling, getting up, flailing as the red sun sails. So, supposing the Three Stooges were real, and like Neil and me were going to work, only they forgot about that, and tragically mistaken and inter-allied, began pasting and cuffing each other at the employment office desk as clerks stare. Supposing in real gray day, and not the gray day of movies and all those afternoons we spent looking at them in hooky or officially on Sundays among the 1,000 crackling children of peanuts and candy in the dark show and the Three Stooges, as in that Golden Dream B-movie of mine around the corner from the Strand, are providing scenes for wild vibrating hysterias as great as the hysterias of hipsters at jazz at the Philharmonics. Supposing in real gray day you saw them, coming down 7th Street looking for jobs as ushers, insurance salesmen, that way. Then I saw the Three Stooges materialize on the sidewalk, their hair blowing in the wind of things. And Neil was with them, laughing and staggering in savage mimicry of them, and himself staggering and gooped, but they didn't notice. I followed him back. There was an afternoon when I found myself hung up in a strange city, maybe after hitchhiking and escaping something, half tears in my eyes, 19 or 20, worrying about my folks and killing time with a B-movie, or any movie, and suddenly the Three Stooges appeared, just the name, goofing on the screen. And in the streets, they're the same streets as outside the theater, only they are photographed in Hollywood by serious crews like Joan Crawford in The Fog. And the Three Stooges were bopping one another, until, as Neil says, they've been at it for so many years in 1,000 unclimactic efforts, super climbing and worked out every refinement of bopping one another, so much that now, in the end, if it isn't already over, in the Baroque period of the Three Stooges, they are finally bopping mechanically and sometimes so hard it is impossible to bear, wince. But by now they've learned not only how to master the style of the blows, but the symbol and acceptance of them also, as though inured in their souls, and of course long ago in their bodies, to buffetings and crashings in the rixy gloom of 30s movies and B-short subjects of that cracked kind that made me yawn at 10 a.m. in my hooky movie of high school days. Intent I was on saving my energy to the serious-jawed features, which in my time was the cleft jaw of Cary Grant. Stooges don't feel the blows anymore. Moe is iron. Curly's dead. Larry's gone. Off the rocker. Beyond hell and gone. So ably hidden by his uncombable mop, in which, as DJ used to say, he hid a Derringer pistol. So there they are. Bonk, boing, and there's Neil following after them, stumbling and saying, "Hey, look out! Hook!" On Laramie or Main Street or Times Square in the mist as they parade erratically like crazy kids past the shoeboxes of simpletons and candy corn arcades. And seriously, Neil talking about him, telling me at the creamy station, under palms, the suggestions thereof, his huge rosy face bent over the time and the thing like a sun in the great day. So then I knew that long ago, when the mist was raw, Neil saw the Three Stooges. Maybe he just stood outside a pawn shop or hardware store, or in that perennial pool hall door, but maybe more likely on the pavings of the city under tragic rainy telephone poles, and thought of the Three Stooges, suddenly realizing that life is strange, and the Three Stooges do exist, that in 10,000 years, that all the goofs he felt in him were justified in the outside world, and he had nothing to reproach himself for. Bonk, boing, crash, skiddly boom, pow slam, bang, boom, wham, blam, crack, frap, kerplunk, clatter, clap, blap, fap, slap, map, splat, crunch, crouch, bong, splat, splat, bong. Bop began with jazz, but one afternoon somewhere on a sidewalk, maybe 1939, 1940, Dizzy Gillespie or Charlie Parker or Thelonious Monk was walking down past a men's clothing store on 42nd Street of South Main in L.A., and from the loudspeaker they suddenly heard a wild, impossible mistake in jazz that could only have been heard inside their own imaginary head, and that is a new art, bop. The name derives from an accident. America was named after an Italian explorer and not after an Indian king. Lionel Hampton had made a record called Hey Bobby Bop, and everybody yelled it, and it was when Lionel would jump in the audience and wail his saxophone at everybody with sweat claps, jumping fools in the aisles, the drummer vastly booming and belaboring on the stage as the whole theater rocked. Sung by Helen Humes, it was a popular record and sold many copies around 1945 or 46. First everyone looked around, then it happened. Bop happened. The bird flew in. Minds went in. On the streets, thousands of new type hepcats in red shirts and some goatees and strange queer-looking cowboys from the west with boots and belts. And the girls began to disappear from the street somehow. You no longer saw, as in the 30s, the Wrangler walking with his doll in a honky-tonk. Now he was alone. Rebop, bop, came into being because the girls were leaving the guys and going off to be middle-class models or something. And Dizzy or Charlie or Thelonious was walking down the street, heard a noise, a sound, half Lester Young, half raw rainy fog, that has that chest-shivering excitement of shack, or track, or empty lot, the sudden vast tiger head on the wood fence, rainy no-school Saturday morning dump yards. Hey! And rushed off dancing. On the piano that night, Thelonious introduced the wooden off-key note to everybody's warm-up notes. Minton's Playhouse, evening starts. Jam hours later, 10 p.m. Colored bar and hotel next door. One or two white visitors, some from Columbia, some from nowhere, some from ships, some from Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, some from Europe. The strange note makes the trumpeter of the band lift an eyebrow. Dizzy is surprised for the first time that day. He puts the trumpet to lips and blows a wet blur. Hee-hee-ha, laughs Charlie Parker, bending down to slap his ankle. He puts his alto to his mouth and says, "Didn't I tell you?" with jazz of notes. Talking eloquent like great poets of foreign languages, singing in foreign countries with lyres by seas. And no one understands because the language isn't alive in the land yet. Bop is the language from America's inevitable Africa. Going, it sounded like gong. Africa is the name of the flu and kickbeat off to one side. The sudden squeak uninhibited that screams muffled at any moment from Dizzy Gillespie's trumpet. Do anything you want. Drawing the tune aside along another improvisation bridge with a reach-out tear of claws, like, why be subtle and false? The band of 10 p.m. Mintons swings into action. Bird Parker was only 18 years old, has a crew cut of Africa, looks impossible, has perfect eyes and composures of a king when suddenly you stop and look at him in the subway, and you can't believe that bop is here to stay. Or modern music, call it what you will, that it is real, and that Negroes in America are just like us. We must look at them understanding the exact racial counterpart of what the man is, and figure it with histories and lost kings of immemorial tribes in jungle and Fellaheen town, and otherwise, and the sad mutts sleeping on old porches in Big Edinburgh woods, where just 90 years ago, old Roost come running calling maw through the fence. He'd just deserted the Confederate Army and was running home for pone, and flies on watermelon porches, and educated judges in horn-rimmed glasses reading the Amsterdam news. And the band realized the goof of life that had made them be not only misplaced in the white nation, but misnoticed for what they really were. And the goof they felt stirring and springing in their bellies. Suddenly Dizzy spats his lips tight drummed together and drives a high screeching fantastic clear note that has everybody in the joint look up. And Bird, lips hanging dully to hear, is turning slowly in a circle, waiting for Diz to swim through the wave of the tune in a toneless, complicated wave of his own, grim like factories, and atonal at any minute, in the logic of the mad. The sock in his belly is sweet, the rock, zonga, monga, bang. In white-creamed afternoons of blue, Bird had leaned back dreamily in eternity as Dizzy outlined to him the importance of becoming Muslims in order to give a solid basis of race to their ceremony. Make that rug swing, mother. When you say race, bow your head and close your eyes. And give them a religion no Uncle Tom Baptist. Make them wearers of skull caps of respectable minarets in actual New York, picking hashi dates from their teeth. Give them new names with zonga sounds. Make it weird. Thelonious, he was so weird. He wandered the twilight streets of Harlem in winter with no hat on his hair, sweating, blowing fog. In his head he heard it all ringing. Often he heard whole choruses by Lester, or Bird, or Dizzy, or Bags. There was a strange English kid hanging around Minton's who stumbled along the sidewalk hearing Lester in his head. Hours of hundreds of developing choruses in regular beat all day, so in the subway no dissonance could crash against unalterable choruses and implacable bars, erected in mind's foundation jazz. Now the tune they were playing was All the Things You Are. They slowed it down and dragged behind it a half-tempo dinosaur proportions, changed the placing of the note in the middle of the harmony to an outer, more precarious position, where also its sense of not belonging was enhanced by the general atonality produced with everyone exteriorizing the tune's harmony. The clonk of the millennial piano like anvils in Petrograd. Blow, said Diz, and Charlie Parker came in for a solo with a squeaky, innocent cry. Monk punched anguished nubbed fingers crawling at the keyboard to tear up foundations and guts of jazz from the big master box. To make Charlie Parker hear his cry and sigh, to jar the orchestra into vibrations, to elicit gloom from the doom of the black piano. He stared down wild-eyed at his keys like a matador at the bull's head. Grown, drunken figures shaded in the weaving background, tottering. The boys didn't care, because on cold corners they stood, three backs to one another, facing all the winds, bent, lips don't care, miserable, cold, and broke, waiting like witch doctors, saying, everything belongs to me because I am poor. Like 12th century monks high in winter belfries of the Gothic organ, they wild-eyed were listening to their own wild sound, which was heralding a new age of music that would eventually require symphonies, schools, centuries of technique, declines and falls of master ripe styles. The Dixieland of Louis Armstrong 16 in New Orleans and the Big Pop's Forest, Jim in the white shirt wailing at a big scarred bass in raunchy Nongri, New Orleans, on South Rampart Street, famous for parades, and Old Perdido Street. All that was mud in the river Mississippi, pasts of 1910 gold rings, derby hats of workers. Soon enough it would leap and fill the gay 20s like champagne in a glass. Pop! And crawl up to the 30s with tired Rudy Valleys lamenting what Louis had laughed in the 20s transoceanic jazz. Sick and tired early Ethel Mermans and old beat bed springs creaking in that stormy weather blues when people lay in bed all day and moaned and had it good. The world of the United States was tired of being poor and low and gloomy in a line. Swing erupted as the Depression began to crack. It was the year marijuana was made illegal, 1937. Young teenagers took to the first restraint, the second, the third. Some still wandered on hobo trains. Lost boys of the 30s numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Salvation armies put up full houses every night, and some were 10 years old. Teenagers, alienated from their parents who have suddenly returned to work and for good to get rid of that damn old mud of the river and tear the rose vine off the porch, paint the porch white and cut the trees down, castrate the hedges, burn the leaves, build a wire fence, get up an antenna, listen. The alienated teenager in the 20th century, finally ripe, gone wild, modern, to be rich and prosperous, no more just around the corner, became the hep cat, the jitterbug, and smoked the new law weed. World War II gave everybody 2 pats of butter in the morning on a service tray, including your sister. Up from tired, degrading swing, wondering what had happened between 37 and 45, and because the army'd worked it, canned it, played it to the boys in North Africa, enraged it into Piccadilly bars, and the Andrews sisters put the corn on the can. Swing with its heroes died, and Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and Thelonious Monk, who were hustled through the chow lines, came back remembering old goofs, and tried it again, and zop! Dizzy screamed, Charlie squealed, Monk crashed, the drummer kicked, the bass question mark plunked, and off they wailed on salt peanuts, jumping like mad monkeys in the gray new air. Hey pork pie, hey pork pie. Skiddly-stoop, sop-dee-up. They came to their own, they jumped, they had jazz and took it in their hands and saw its history, vicissitudes and developments, and turned it to their weighty use, and heavily carried it clanking like posts across the enormity of a new world philosophy, and a new strange and crazy grace came over them. Fell from the air free. They saw pity in the whole of heaven, hell in their hearts. Billie Holiday had rocks in her heart. Lester droopy pork-pied hung his horn and blew bop lazy ideas inside jazz at everybody dreaming. Miles Davis leaning against the piano, fingering his trumpet with a cigarette hand working, making raw iron sound like wood, speaking in long sentences like Marcel Proust. Hey Jim, and the stud comes swinging down the street and says he's real bent and he is down and he has a twisted face. He works, he wails, he bops, he bangs. This man who was sent, stoned and stabbed, is now down, bent and stretched out. He is home at last. His music is here to stay. His history has washed over us. His imperialistic kingdoms are coming.